This is the talk on chapter 9. There's a couple of things though that I want to tell you before we actually get started on this chapter. First, I realized that my second talk was longer than my first one, and that wasn't really what I had intended. What I'm going to do with this one is, because it's kind of a long chapter, is I'm going to do it in 2 parts. I'm going to try this with a little light on and see if that makes it any better. I'm going to try to do it in 2 parts so that it's not quite so long. Also, this one is going to be put online on the 30th of March, and also on the 30th of March there will be scenarios. There's 3 choices of scenarios or fact situations for your small claims case. What I want you to do is to read them, decide which one you'd like to work with, and then just text me or email me and tell me which one you picked, because I want to know how many people are in each group. And then make sure that you follow up the folder that says transition planning, because I'm going to put new, anything that I need to tell you, I'm going to put in that module on Canvas. Also on Canvas there will be a question that you can answer that will be worth 2 extra credit points. So you just need to send those back to me. The reviews came back really well. There were only a couple that I had problems reading. Talked to the people, we've got that worked out. So pretty much that was fine. So however you sent me your review, hopefully that's how you also sent me your test, because you might have done your test before you watched this lecture. And continue to send me your assignments that way. Just remember that it's going to take me a little bit longer to get back and grade some of them, because it's all coming in individually at different times in different ways. So it's going to take me just a little bit of time. All right, so let's talk right now then about intellectual property. This is chapter 9. This is the one that we did not cover before. We had skipped this when we were running a little late, and I told you we would pick it up again at the end of the semester, and now it's time to pick it up. Intellectual property is talking about trademarks and copyrights and patents, and we're going to talk a little bit about trade secrets and whether or not you have any protections for computer software. This talk will probably just center on trademarks and copyrights, and then we'll be stopping. And then I'll pick up the rest of it on another lecture so that you can sit and watch them at shorter periods of time. All right, so what we're talking about when we talk about trademarks is the Lanham Act. The Lanham Act is a federal law, and that means that it covers the entire United States. And what it does is allow people to register a trademark. The purpose of this originally is to protect consumers so that they know where their product is coming from, and that if they see a certain mark, then they know, or hopefully they know who made it, whether or not they can trust that source, whether or not it's going to be a good product for them. And of course the person who has developed that product wants to make sure that their competitors are not putting out false information, that they're really the ones that made the mark. All right, there are 2 kinds of marks. There are trademarks and service marks. And I'm only going to use the word trademark because otherwise it just gets too confusing. But a trademark is one that is for a product. A service mark is for one that is a service. Okay, so you need to keep those separated out in your mind. The rules are really the same, which is why I'm kind of using the word just trademark to make it easier to understand for you. But we're talking about both trademarks and service marks. All right, the purpose of these marks and why we allow people to register them, and they register them, the principal register, at the United States Patent and Trademark Offices. That's one that you should be able to remember because it's, United States Patent and Trademark Office. In the United States, the one that gets the trademark is the first person who actually uses the trademark. What we want to do when we're talking about both trademarks and copyrights is we don't want people to sit with ideas and keep them in their mind. That's not useful to anybody if they don't talk about them, do anything with them. We want them to actually use what they have developed, what they have made, what they have thought of. And so that's what we allow to be protected. So that's why we give protections to the first to use when we're talking about the trademarks. Okay, on an international level, there is the Madrid Protocol, and protocol here really is the same as a treaty. So remember, treaties, like contracts, only bind the people who have actually signed them. So the signers of the Madrid Protocol will be willing to follow all the rules that all the other countries have set up. That's kind of the agreement in that, but that's on the international level. Okay, now, can you register everything that you want to? No, you can't. Not everything can be registered. And what we look at is to find out how distinctive are they. And we have 5 different levels of distinction. And they are either coined or fanciful, arbitrary, suggestive, descriptive, or generic. And everything is pretty much going to fall into one of those categories. If it is coined or fanciful, or arbitrary, or suggestive, you're going to be able, pretty much without any question, unless of course you're not the first one to do it, you're going to be able to register those marks. So for example, what is coined or fanciful? Well, coined or fanciful is something that somebody just made up. They just sat around thinking, okay, what could we name this? What could we do? What could we have it? And it doesn't have anything to do with the product itself. And the example in the book is Exxon. Exxon doesn't really have anything to do with gas. Cengage, which is the publisher of the materials that we use. Cengage doesn't have anything to do with books. The word Cengage doesn't have anything to do with writing up materials for learning. It was just purely made up. And so those ones, Cengage and Exxon, they were allowed a mark, and they have them. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they've got the right to use those names, and you don't have the right to use them unless you are Exxon or Cengage. Okay, arbitrary. If the name is not a made-up word, but it has nothing to do with your product, it's just this word you liked and you picked it and that's what you decided to do. Now normally, if we were in class on this, I would have around me and on the screen and on the board and everything else a whole bunch of trademarks so that you could see this. And if you ever want to know what a trademark is and what one of these categories might be, just Google it and look online and you'll see all the trademarks that there are out there. But for example, Apple. Pretty much everybody knows if they see an apple with the bite out of it on a product, such as the iPad that I'm using for this, that's what company that is. Apple doesn't have anything to do with iPads, it doesn't have anything to do with phones, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. But it is a word. It is a word that we use in common everyday speech. But it's just arbitrary. They just decided, and I wasn't there at the time, I wish I was, to decide to name their company and their products Apple products. They've got a mark on that. All right, suggestive is the next layer, and again, suggestive are ones that you can easily trademark. And suggestive is something like Coppertone. Coppertone doesn't say it's going to give you a suntan. It doesn't have anything to do with that, actually, but it is suggestive of what it is that product can do for you. And so Coppertone, for the sun products, has their mark. All right, it becomes a little more difficult when we get down to terms that are descriptive or generic. If it is a descriptive term, one that you might use in everyday speaking, then you have to prove that this particular term has taken on a secondary meaning. And that people, when they hear that term, associate it with a particular kind of product. For example, Sports Illustrated. You could possibly use that in speaking, but most people now, when you hear the words Sports Illustrated, you think the magazine Sports Illustrated and everything they have in there. It has taken on a distinctiveness. It has taken on a secondary meaning. We're not just talking about somebody drawing a picture of somebody participating in a sport. We're talking about Sports Illustrated, a magazine, and of course more particularly their swimsuit magazine. But people associate that with it. So, and the company of course could show that it had a secondary meaning, that people, when they heard the word Sports Illustrated, that's what they thought of. All right? So that's a descriptive term. Usually we don't allow geographic terms because, I mean, we use North, Troy, we use these kinds of things all the time in ordinary speech. And when we're getting a mark, we're trying to stop people from using them all the time in different ways. So again, we will allow it to be marked, allow it to be registered, if it has taken on this distinctiveness or this secondary meaning. And you know, they have some of the examples in the book. Frankly, I'm not real familiar with Boston beer, some of you may be. Philadelphia cream cheese, when you hear Philadelphia cream cheese, it's something that comes to mind, that you are thinking of this product that is usually kind of white and that you put it on bagels and things like that. It has a secondary meaning for you. It's not just referring to the city of Philadelphia. Sometimes personal names can be trademarked. But again, if it's a personal name, then it has to have a secondary meaning. And probably means you gotta be famous. But David Beckham has registered his names in all of the products, and he's got a lot of products out there. But his name is distinctive, and so he was able to register his name. I'm guessing that if your name was John Smith, you would have a really tough time registering that because there are so many John Smiths. But David Beckham, when people think of that word, they think of a particular person. And so it's kind of acquired a secondary meaning, and he was able to go ahead and do that. Now, generic terms, we don't allow them to be trademarked. Generic terms are ordinary words that we use every day. Soap. Could you imagine if you were allowed to use the word soap unless you refer to a particular kind of soap? What would everybody else call the stuff they use? So if it's generic, just something that's across the board, then you're not able to trademark that. If you're the company with the mark, you want to stop somebody from using your mark because you think that your customers are being confused about what it is that you are selling to them or that the other people are selling to them, then you have a pretty high burden. You're the one that has to prove that they're violating your trademark, that there's a trademark infringement. What you have to do is, well, usually what people do in this case is they send the person a cease and desist letter. And people who hold trademarks are pretty aggressive about going after people who try to use their trademarks. If you sit on it, you're going to have a problem. If you don't go after people who are violating your trademark, you're going to have a problem. You're going to lose it, and we'll get to that in just a second. So they will go after, and it usually starts off with this cease and desist letter, which is a letter saying, we have the trademark, stop using it. If you don't stop using it, we're going to go after you. And we're going to go after you with an injunction, and we've talked about injunctions before. That's getting somebody to stop doing something, and damages if that's necessary. That, you know, we think that people are not buying our product because they're confusing it with yours. people are coming after us because the product's defective and they think it's our product and it's not, then we're going to go after you. We're not going to sit. We're not going to go ahead and let you do what you want to do with this. All right, so what do you have to prove if you do decide that you are going to take someone to court and you do decide there's going to be an infringement? The courts look at all of the things, and the big thing is, first you've got to be able to prove that you have a valid mark. Then you have to be able to prove that you were the first one to use that mark. And we're talking the United States, okay? And then we have to prove that this was never designed to give companies a monopoly. That was not the original purpose of allowing marks. So you have to prove that you have a mark, that you were the first to use the mark, and that the other company, their use of that mark is causing a confusion to consumers. That consumers are thinking when they take that brand off the store shelf, that they're taking your product off the store shelf. And then on page 156 of the book, it goes through all of the things that a court considers before they decide to allow you to uphold your mark. And there's a lot of things that don't come with those three things where you have to prove. For example, you have to show the similarity of the products, you have to show a lack of good faith by the defendant, you have to show how sophisticated or not sophisticated the buyers of the product are. It is not easy in many cases to prove a trademark infringement, but it lists out there the things that you would have to do and what the courts would consider if you were going after. And I will also remind you that some of the things I'm doing in these talks is just highlighting some of the stuff that's in the book or that's in the outline that Cengage prepares that I've also put online for you. It's not going to actually every single thing that's in the book. Okay, so what happens if you don't go after someone who you think is violating your trademark? Well, you're going to lose it. We're saying if you don't want the exclusive right, and that's what a trademark is really doing, it's giving you the exclusive right to use for your product. If you don't want it, if you don't care if somebody else uses it, well then, why should we care? So you can lose it easily. And words like aspirin, thermos, cellophane, shredded wheat, those all once had trademarks. But they became a part of every ordinary day use, and evidently nobody tried to stop it. And those words were in ordinary everyday use for as long as I remember. And what we have is if it's 3 years of non-consecutive use, you lose your you've abandoned your trademark. So if you had a trademark and you knew somebody else was using your trademark, you got to go after them. And I've put online an article that I got from the Free Press about a woman in Georgia who just last November filed a lawsuit against Target. And her claim is that Target stole her trademark. And the one that she is objecting to is the Good and Gather flagship food brand. And she says that she trademarked it in 2014, that she is alleging that it's creating confusion in the market. The trademark that she has is Garnish and Gather. So Target is using Good and Gather, she's using Garnish and Gather, and that is providing confusion in the market. She gave them notice of the trademark infringement, but the retailer said, we don't think it is, we don't agree with you, and they went ahead with this. I'm not sure that this happened in this area here. She's from Georgia, maybe, I don't know. But it was just filed in November, so it's still pending. There hasn't been a result, at least not one that I can find anywhere. And she's asking for a temporary restraining order, which is an injunction, for them to not be able to go ahead with the launch or go ahead with this food brand products. But if you'd like, I'm going to add that online so that you can have a chance to read that if you'd like. Okay? All right. trade dress. Trade dress, actually for a long time really wasn't perfected, but trade dress involves a product's total image. Everything, the packaging, how it's looked, how it's sold. And if the plaintiff, and a plaintiff being somebody who's alleging somebody else is stealing their trade dress, if they can prove that their trade dress is distinctive, it's not like anybody else's, and it's non-functional. If you have to have that particular kind of packaging in order to sell that product, then you can't. Remember, the whole purpose of this is not to create a monopoly, it's to prevent confusion. So it has to be non-functional. And then, of course, you have to be able to show that it's causing confusion in the marketplace, that the way you package and sell your product, somebody else is using something that looks identical to it or very similar to it. And that when someone's shopping in the marketplace and they take something off the shelf, they think you're taking your product, and they're not. And you've got to be able to prove that. You can't just say it, you have to be able to prove it, that consumers are being deceived. And in recent years, we've also allowed some people to get limited protection for product design. And that's not the packaging, not the trade dress of the product, not how you sell it, but the actual design of the product, which includes the shape, the pattern, some of those kinds of things. The courts have allowed them, if they have this secondary meaning, if people look at that and think, oh, I know what that is, and you can prove that they know that, then you may get some protection for your trade design. Okay, you can trademark internet domain names, and many people now trademark their internet domain names. Amazon, Priceline, Cengage, and since we now have more and more of the endings that you can put on your domain names, lots and lots of people are now trademarking those so that somebody else can't use them. You should know what cyber squatters means. Cyber squatter is someone, business, a person, whatever, okay, who register and set up domain names that are identical or very similar to ones that are already out there and have been trademarked by somebody else. And we call them cyber squatters. What they want to do is sell what they've done to the person who really has the trademark, or ransom it. And we've decided that's not fair. That's not right. Adding an extra name, like an extra S, Victoria's Secrets was one in here where they added an extra S in the middle, which was an easy mistake that people would make when they were putting that in, typing that in. And then they'd say, well, I'll sell you that so that people, when they type in that extra S, will still go to your site instead of mine. And we don't allow that. Okay, so cyber squatting, we have decided, is wrong. Now, a lot of these things, you don't get a lot of lawsuits about it because these are things that are typically settled by arbitration. A lot of these business things are settled by arbitration because it involves trade secrets. It involves things that you might not want to put out to the general public. And court proceedings in the United States are not secret. If you go into court and you have to use things as evidence, the world might know what it is you are putting out there, and you might not want that. So a lot of these are handled by arbitration, especially too if it's an international level. It's just much easier to do arbitration than it is to use the court systems for these kinds of problems. So sometimes you can't find out then what actually has happened in a particular case because it has gone to arbitration. And we've spent some time talking about arbitration before, so I'm not going to really get into that now. All right, so copyrights. Okay, copyrights. Oh, by the way, when you trademark something, I forgot to tell you this. When you trademark something, when you put it on your product, you have to put that it's trademarked. So look around and find, because there'll be a question on the last test about this, is that an R in a circle or TM in a circle will tell you that that's trademarked. it'll tell you you can't use that because somebody else already is, and somebody already has that mark. But it has to be on there. If you're going to enforce it, you're going to have to be able to show that you've marked your product. And if you keep that in mind, that it's a trademark and you mark your product. All right, so copyrights. Copyrights are not designed to protect ideas that you keep in your head. A copyright is an exclusive, and remember when we're talking about exclusive, we're talking about I have it, you don't. It's the exclusive right that's given by federal statute. Again, this is federal law. We wouldn't have 50 different states with different rules about copyrights. So it's a federal statute that gives the creator of a literary or an artistic work to use, reproduce, and display the work. Doesn't give you the right to have the exclusive use of an idea. We're not protecting ideas with a copyright. We don't want you to keep it in your head. We want you to do something with it. Other people can see it. Other people, get the benefit of what you have created. And what if I decided I wanted to copyright an idea that I have in my mind, an idea of what a picture of an apple should look like? Now, I never make a picture of an apple. I don't photograph a picture of an apple. I don't write a play about the picture of the apple. I do nothing with it. I just have it in my mind. That would mean that no one else could ever draw a picture of an apple. And that's not what we want. That's not what we're trying to protect. Because when we give someone a copyright, what we're doing is giving somebody with this artistic idea a chance to get paid for it. And that's what copyrights do, is they allow you to get paid for it. Now, there's a lot of people that think that our copyright law is outdated, that it's not really protecting anybody right now, and that we really need to change it. And maybe in the future we will. There may be other ways that we give artists a way to be compensated for their work. But for right now, what we have are copyrights. Okay? So, and of course it protects it, this is a federal statute, it protects it in the United States. And one of the big companies that we're still arguing about all the time, with whether or not they are going to follow our copyright laws or not cheat and take our information, is China. They so far have not agreed with our copyright laws, and that's a big problem. All right, now, how long do they last? They last quite a long time, and we've just extended it. It's a little bit complicated. You can read that in the book if you want to. Just know that it's not infinite. It doesn't go on forever, though sometimes it seems like it. Happy Birthday just very recently came into the public domain. And that means probably if you've been singing Happy Birthday in your life since you were a little kid, you've probably been violating the copyright because you can't do that. Occasionally someone will do it on TV and you'll say, oh no, we're going to have to pay a fine for that because they were violating someone's copyright. If you go to a restaurant, they used to sing Happy Birthday to people if you told them it was your birthday. And then they had to stop doing that. And so they came up with all these other different songs that they would sing to you when it was your birthday. The reason they were singing that is because they were being sued for violating this copyright for Happy Birthday. And a couple of years ago, a judge finally said, this is enough. It's been protected for long enough. People sing this all the time, and now they can sing it without being afraid that they're violating a copyright. Okay, so that was Happy Birthday, the song. And obviously the person who originally probably wrote the song is long dead, and it was the heirs that were keeping this fight going so that they could get royalties. Because that's the big deal when you do copyrights, is the royalties. Now, we no longer require that you put copyright, and you're probably used to seeing this. It's the little C in a circle that says that it's copyright. And so some people have stopped using that on their copyrighted materials, The problem is that if you were going to sue somebody for violating your copyright, you have to be able to prove that they knew that you had a copyright. And the easiest way, of course, to show that you have a copyright is to put that little C on it and mark it. And so while you don't have to, I think a lot of people have gone back to doing it because then it makes it much easier to prove. Okay, now, copyright holders, they have the right to reproduce their work many times as they want to. They can prepare derivative works. If you've written a book, you could write, maybe a screenplay for it. To distribute copies of the recordings of your work, to publicly perform your work, and to publicly display your work. You have the exclusive right, if you have a copyright, to do those 5 things. You also have the right to let somebody else do it. But that somebody else is going to have to pay you. And for example, even churches are not exempt from this. If churches are singing hymns that are more recent and that still have copyrights on them, because some of them, of course, are very old and are in the public domain now. But if they're more recent, they don't have the right to just play them and use them in church without paying the person who has the copyright. Now, most of these now, especially with some of the songwriters and singers, have banded together and they have a group, and you buy a copyright from that organization, and then that allows you to use the music of a lot of different people, anybody who might be in their group. And it's not really all that expensive. But if you don't do it, and they go after you, it's a big problem. That's why when you see some dance recitals, and I've gone to a lot of dance recitals, when you see dance recitals, you might hear very old music. If they use more modern music, they got to play the copyright. And the more modern and well-liked it is, probably the more expensive that copyright is going to be to obtain. Excuse me. But you have to do it. That's just it. You have to do that. When you call, if you call a government office, call Macomb County, call their number sometime, and you'll hear music. You'll hear classical music from hundreds of years ago. Don't have to worry about copyright violation then. Now there were some big lawsuits. A lot of them were centered around here. Some of them Ann Arbor students. And they also went after their parents, who had developed a way of disseminating music to their friends without paying any money for it or violating a lot of the copyrights. And even if you're not the one who originally does it, but you are passing it on to someone else knowing that it was in a violation of a copyright, you might also be exposed to liability. And they also went after the parents of the students. I'm assuming because they were using the parents' equipment. I don't remember exactly all of that. But it's simply not okay to violate somebody else's copyright. That's the way our artists get their money. Without that, they wouldn't have any way of being compensated. And we do have kind of a tradition here that if someone has an idea, a literary idea, an artistic idea, that we're going to allow them to get paid for that if they use that idea. All right, now, we do have the Digital Millennial Copyright Act, and that goes after people who try to break encryptions. It is not okay. There are civil and criminal penalties for circumventing encryption software. You also can't manufacture, import, sale, or distribute circumvention devices because, of course, as soon as they put encryption into place, somebody figured out how to get around it. So that law is 1998. In terms of laws, that's really relatively recent. Again, it's a federal law, it's not a state law. It's not okay to break encryptions. All right, now, are there times when you can use someone else's work? Well, there is this thing called fair use. And fair use means that you can use copyrighted works, a limited amount of a copyrighted work. If you're using it because you're criticizing it, like, if you go to see a play and you want to criticize the play, news reporting, teaching, and research, you use a limited amount of someone's copyrighted work without being in violation of their copyright. There were a lot of lawsuits against colleges, not against Macomb. They, to my knowledge, did not have one, and I've taken the class here. But some of the bigger universities about their professors violating copyright laws. And the schools all thought they were going to lose, but actually they came out a lot better in the courts than they thought they were going to. But the court looks at certain things to determine, is it really fair use? And what they look at is the purpose and character of the work. Are you using it for a nonprofit purpose? Or are you making money off of this? What is the copyrighted work? How much of it did you use? And the effect on the potential market. You using my copyrighted work, does that mean I'm never going to be able to sell my book again? Does it mean that everybody's just, I wrote this book, I was getting copyrights, and all of a sudden it's out in the market completely and I'm not getting any money at all? That's what they look at to decide whether or not it's fair use. A few years ago, there were some professors who decided that for whatever reason, books were getting too expensive, and I think we all agree they're very expensive. But they start to prepare course packets, and students would buy the course packet instead of buying the book. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that, except that what they started doing is using more and more of someone else's book and putting that in their course packet. That most schools decided was a problem. And if you're going to get a course packet now, it really needs to be a course packet that the teacher has prepared, that the teacher has put together, using maybe some parts of somebody else's work, but not the whole thing, and not the majority of it. So those are the things that the court look to see if it's fair use and not a violation of the copyright laws. All right. That is as far as I'm going to go on this particular tape. I'm going to pick up the patents and some of the trade secret and some of the other things in another video. Remember, there will be an extra credit thing online this time, and there will be the scenarios, and hopefully by the time you watch this, you have already turned your test in to me.